This is Tornado Talk, a podcast about one of nature's most fascinating phenomenon. Share your tornado story with us by email, Jen and Dan at tornadotalk.com. That's Jen and Dan at tornadotalk.com. Now, meteorologists Jennifer Naramore and Dan Holliday. Tornado Talk is on.
If there's one guarantee in life, it is that there are no guarantees. In the blink of an eye, everything can change. On August 26th, 2007, that's what happened to Northwood, North Dakota.
So dispatch, Northwood Fire 7301. 7301, go ahead. Mutual aid from Lambo if they can, and if they can, we took a direct hit to the fire hall.
A community in the Northern Plains took a direct hit from a massive tornado. It's not often twisters come this big to North Dakota, but in a world of no guarantees, it happened on a late summer night.
Northwood resident Dave Corsmo, who flew over the damage after the tornado tore through Northwood.
The streets were just littered with debris. It was like a bomb had gone off and the whole town had been hit by this huge destructive bomb.
Warning coordination meteorologist at the Grand Forks National Weather Service, Greg Gust, who was working the night of the storm.
From a warning standpoint, from the people that are watching the radar, they're anticipating serious injury or death because that is moving right into Northwood at that time.
And former Northwood, North Dakota Mayor Rick Johnson talks about pulling the city together following the devastating disaster.
We had the governor fly in, and we actually went from house to house, looking at the damage, and he was very good at the time, reassuring them that some help would be on the way.
This is Tornado Talk, Nightmare in Northwood. A look back at the powerful tornado that pummeled a town of about 1,000 people on August 26, 2007. One person killed, 18 hurt, and more than $52 million in damage occurred.
In all, supercells produced 11 tornadoes, 2 of which were in Minnesota and 9 in North Dakota. Those 9 tornadoes on August 26, 2007 were 40% of what the state typically experiences in an entire year.
Greg Gust is the warning coordination meteorologist at the National Weather Service in Grand Forks. He was in the same position on the night the tornado struck. It is, without a doubt, one of the most active severe weather events he's experienced.
So we're getting this, first of all, a very large supercell actually setting up maybe, 20, 25 miles to the west of Northwood. We call it the Rogue Lake tornado. That is the result of that. But that was actually the first really big tornado that developed. And we actually, though we warned on that storm, that is the initial warning that we extended eastward into the Northwood area some 45, 50 minutes before Northwood was hit. That tornado, that supercell, actually drifted up to the north and northeast and rounded to the north of Northwood. So that was not the tornado that hit Northwood. It was another cell that developed southwest of Northwood. So we have the initial warning on. We know we have this highly charged atmosphere. We had local storm chasers, of course, in the area that were out and getting in positioning. And then, of course, we would have had the moderate risk for severe weather out in advance with the tornado watch in effect. So all of those things lined up to identify that this was a big target area, this was a big event for us. But that first tornado setting up, moving to the north of Northwood. The second one, the cell that set up just to the southwest of Northwood, maybe about 8-10 miles to the southwest of Northwood. When that started developing and we could see the rotation of that, and we saw that was directly aiming toward Northwood. So now the next warning goes out. That whole process of wrapping up for that storm is proceeding. But meanwhile, from a forecaster standpoint, from a warning standpoint, we are seeing this storm in fairly high detail. The nice thing about it from a meteorological sense was that it was happening within 18 to 20 miles of the radar, that our primary radar located just north of Mayville, North Dakota. So we could actually see in pretty high detail the development of the storm. So as it's moving northward, as it's digging in, as we speak, we could see the classic hook on that storm. We could see the velocity couplet. We could see that velocity couplet intensifying quite dramatically as it's approaching town. And then, of course, we start to see what we call the debris ball. So on reflectivity, we're seeing that area at the base of the hook that starts to intensify with reflectivity, and to us that means wet debris. So from a warning standpoint, from the people that are watching the radar, they're anticipating serious injury or death because that is moving right into Northwood at that time. So again, we're that to the warning person, that's something that you're preparing yourself for, but that's a very intense period right in there.
Dave Korsmo farms and has his own trucking business in the eastern part of North Dakota. He said that night is so easy to recollect because it reminds him of a long-lost friend.
Well, on the day of the tornado, the early morning, and this is kind of in addition to the tornado, we have a place in Minnesota. We were at our lake place, and I had a call early Sunday morning that our pastor, who was in his late 40s, had a heart attack and died during the night. So we hurried up and gathered up. We were good friends with him, and we gathered up our family, and we came back home. And on the way home, we started seeing these kind of suspicious weather phenomena that was looking as we look west into the horizon as we're coming back. And then we tuned in on local radio and started hearing tornado forecasts, from the local weather stations.
Rick Johnson has lived in Northwood all of his life. He says the community is made up of 70 to 80% Norwegians. He knows that statistic because he served as the town's mayor back in 2007. But before the storm hit, it was his primary business he was most worried about.
Well, I own a car dealership, and I was worried about hail more than I was a tornado, because I had hail about 2 weeks before that and damaged about 18 cars. So I have a lot along the highway in Northwood here, and I was out moving cars off a lot into an indoor shelter. And we got down to about the last 2 cars, and my wife and my daughter says, we're going home. We're not going to go out to the highway again. So I listened to them, and I went home. And when we got home, it was just a matter of, 30 seconds, and we could hear a large rumble and watch some branches blow by, and I thought, boy, something happened. We got in my car and turned the corner and could see Main Street, and I went, oh, my God, there was wires and trees, and you could begin to see houses that were blown apart or, the roof torn off, and made my way to City Hall. And right away we tried to establish a plan of man, what are we going to do? And that's where we started.
Dave Korsmo had just arrived back in Northwood as severe weather was underway, but before the tornado struck, his first stop was to see if his family had sought shelter.
We were going to check on my mom and dad, which they live in the same town, and so we went directly over there, and we no more got into the house, and the alarm started ringing, and we have the local fire warning signals for tornado has a different sound, and all the different signals are alerted by how they sound. And so the tornado one then was ringing. And so we hurried up into the house, and we gathered everybody up, and we headed into their downstairs area. And we no more got down there, and the tornado hit. It hit Northwood. It hit our home, or my folks' home.
The time was approximately 8:42 p.m. The twister would stay on the ground in Northwood for another 12 minutes, just long enough to do major damage. All the ingredients had come together in the atmosphere for supercells across the northern plains. Meteorologist Greg Gust at the National Weather Service said Northwood was able to receive plenty of warning lead time because of that.
Most people were getting to shelter. There was quite a bit of warning. Sirens were going off repeatedly until, of course, the power ceases. So you've got the blackout that occurs once your power lines are cut, your internet lines, your cell lines, everything is going down because of the catastrophic failure of towers and systems. So as that storm would be hitting the city, that notification ceases.
The switchboard to the 911 call center was slammed. People needed help.
911, what's your emergency? help, you can't.
What's going on? Ma'am, you need to calm down. I can't understand you.
Okay, we're in the trailer park.
We're in the trailer park where?
In Northwood.
Okay, and is anybody hurt?
He's pinned under his trailer.
Okay, who's hurt, ma'am?
I'm dead bad.
Okay, I'm going to send somebody over to help you right now.
The one thing that we did after the tornado that an hour or so happened, we started looking through the town to see if people needed help. We first went to there was 2 trailer courts in town. The one trailer court on the east end of town was completely destroyed. People were there was nobody hurt there, but on the other trailer court, which is in the north end of town, there was one fatality, which is it's amazing that it was just one fatality. If you could see the destruction, it was unbelievable that there were other injuries, but not fatalities.
As ambulances were dispatched, meteorologist Greg Gust was trying to keep them out of harm's way as they headed from Grand Forks to Northwood because severe weather was still going on.
About that time that it's going through there, and as that storm is still moving up into the east-northeast of Northwood, we could hear in the background that the city of Grand Forks is dispatching ambulances to that area coming up from south from the Mayville area, but also from Grand Forks. And we heard them say that they were sending them south on the interstate from Grand Forks and then to the west on Highway 15 from Thompson. And I immediately picked up NAWAS and I said, don't do that. That's into the storm. Had them send them west on Highway 2 and drop in from the north behind the storm. Otherwise, they would have been driving right into the path of the tornado.
After riding out what hit Northwood, Dave Korsmo said this tornado was much different than anything he's ever been through before.
We knew that it wasn't something small because we heard the rumble, we heard the excessive winds, we heard a lot of banging, we heard... we were downstairs. There wasn't windows that we could look out down there towards the west, but it sounded like a freight train going through is what it did. When everything quieted down, then we came up the stairway, and when we took a look at the house, all the windows in the house were basically gone. The curtains were flying in the wind. It was excessive rain was also coming along with it. So, and that is probably as much of what happened when everybody's roofs opened up. These rains just poured down and soaked everything up. We went outside then to see. We had cars parked in the driveway, and several of our cars were damaged by debris that had been hitting them. Windows busted out, and just dents and damage to the vehicles. We thought, there was probably going to be some injury. We started looking around to the neighbors then. There was an apartment house that was just kind of across, just a few, about equivalent of a block away. My brother and I went over there to see if everybody was okay over there, because I knew it was older people living in there. And that apartment complex was damaged heavily. People were standing in their doorways. Fortunately, there was nobody hurt there, but people were standing in their doorways just kind of just bewildered. I mean, it was older people that hadn't quite been listening to the radio, probably didn't know exactly what had happened, but and we assured them that we were going to check through the apartments, make sure everyone was all right, and they were.
Former Northwood Mayor Rick Johnson said his job was to help lead in the storm's aftermath. There were injuries, a fatality, and massive damage.
Well, the first thing we did, and we had a really good city administrator at that time, and police department was there because he was, he kind of tracked the tornado and watched it come into town. So the first thing we done is basically we set out a map of Northwood and tried to mark it off into sections. So when we had a really good turnout for volunteers, when they come to town, we knew kind of which section, to send them to. So we tried to organize a little bit, sending everybody in different places so the work was kind of evened out. And I thought that went really well.
Northwood resident Dave Korsmo said once he began looking around, it was no longer the community he remembered. Everything had changed.
Well, we didn't recognize the town. People were coming out of their houses. I mean, you didn't have any landmarks anymore because most of the trees, the big trees were gone. The streets were just littered with debris. It was like a bomb had gone off and the whole town had been hit by this huge destructive bomb. Roofs laying in other people's yards, clothing all over the place, trees blocking the roads, buildings half tore down, people going out trying to find their belongings, looking for things that they knew were of value, neighbors helping neighbors. It was quite to see Northwood today in comparison to what had happened after the aftermath of that tornado was just absolutely unbelievable.
According to a special publication from the National Weather Service, what happened on August 26, 2007 was considered, quote, uncommon. The tornado was rain-wrapped. Researchers said that continual evaluation of the new storm environment assisted in warning the public, keeping the death toll far lower than it could have been. Greg Gust of the National Weather Service was part of the survey team and vividly remembers what he saw.
To come onto a scene where you have, where you're seeing damage and it's extending from one end of town to the other, and you're realizing, going back and checking the initiation of this, coming through that town and continuing on, you're realizing that that's how wide it is. At this point, 7/8 of a mile wide at its widest going through town. So you have literally the town of Northwood is less than a square mile in size. So you have the northwest corner that's not really being touched right there, and the far southeast edge of town, but right through the central corridor, everything is getting impacted, and most of that F2 to F3 scale damage. So most of that is, the first thing you see is the trees. The trees are gone, and then you notice that the garages. All the garages are gone. So all of these smaller buildings, the smaller outbuildings, the garages, the attached garage, the detached garage, and the trees are just getting wiped out of there. And then you're noticing that roofs are being completely ripped off of buildings, and then the upper part of an apartment building, and then you're seeing structures where you're starting to get from that F2 into that F3 damage. And that's pretty much what the bulk of the community was experiencing. And then up in the northeast part, that's where you had areas that were even more completely demolished. And now you're seeing not just the trees gone, but you're seeing the deep arced trees, or just the totally shaved off areas. And so it's again, that was the time too when I started to realize the multi-vortex nature of this tornado. So you have a large scale footprint, but within there you have areas where individual tornado vortices that are wrapping around that common center. Some are more intense than others, some are doing more intense damage here than there, and so you start getting that differential type of damage through that pattern that you have to kind of sort out, and also the way debris moves around. So I saw that the first day. The second day, going back and showing some other members of our office. But then when we got out to the Rogue Lake tornado, we eventually got a video very shortly sent to us by one of our cooperative observers there that showed that nature of a multi-vortex tornado. And so now that was the first time we had a video of that type of thing as well within this area up here.
The Northwood tornado would be rated an EF4, one of the first ratings after the Fujita scale had been enhanced. How difficult was it for Greg and his team to transition to the new scale?
The damage in town was more in the EF2 and 3 scale, and it was really, I got something in this where I talk about the suction vortices and the dust in where that EF4 damage area was by comparison. And I think, one of the details of that, the EF rating versus F rating really was not a difficult learning curve, because it was simply, you're always working with the same relative damage. You're just changing what the respective wind speed might be relative to that damage. So we were looking at the damage, identifying what were the different types of damage indicators out there, and then basically backtracking to get the possible maximum wind speed. So between doing F scale versus EF scale, it's nearly immaterial. Now, I've had one tornado that was back in 2004, which if I would have had the EF toolkit at that time, I probably would have rated 5, EF5, and I kept it at the very top end of the F4 scale. But there are some things that you learn through the process, and with the EF scale and a lot more engineering-based information in there, I'd have felt more comfortable going with the F5 rating on that one.
Rick Johnson was not only assessing the damage losses of his residents and friends, but of his own business as well.
In my car lot, I lost 18 vehicles that were completely totaled out. Some of them ended up from the lot up to probably 3/4 a mile away, blew across the highway, and I don't know what happened, if they rolled or if they were actually picked up and thrown that far. I lost 18 vehicles, and damage to my building in town here was probably in that $50,000 to $60,000 range.
People started showing up to help in any way possible. The community needed all the assistance it could get.
I know that the UND football team, for instance, came out here. We had a field of corn that was littered with, we have a field that's not too far out of Northwood that was littered with debris. And they came out with their whole football team, and they walked that whole entire field and cleaned the debris out of there. The volunteers that came, I mean, there was people from all over. It was amazing how people come. And, of course, the people that came here from FEMA had just come from Katrina at the time when the devastation over New Orleans. And so a lot of those people came to Northwood as their next stop for disaster control.
Then Mayor Rick Johnson recalls state officials wanting to assure residents they would do everything they could to restore life back to normal.
It just seemed like everything kind of fell together. We tried to hold as many meetings. We had the governor fly in, and we actually went from house to house, looking at the damage, and he was very good at the time, reassuring them that some help would be on the way. You could say it just kind of fell into place. The volunteers were a big plus. I mean, there was payloaders coming in, I would say 20 minutes after the tornado hit. They were already here clearing paths, through the streets so people could get around.
Hours after the event, residents sifted through their insurance policies, making phone calls to claim damage to their home. Former Mayor Rick Johnson says one of the things he recalls most is how many people learned that the policy they had wouldn't be enough to cover their losses. A sign to anyone and everyone in the future to read the fine print and be fully prepared for any disaster.
They thought they were insured. My house is covered, no problem, we're going to get paid. Well, a lot of them were really underinsured. They probably didn't go replacement cost. The big thing there is, and I hate to blame the agents, but the people are always looking for the cheapest premium. And the cheapest premium doesn't always give you the best results. And some of these people were really stuck for money when it comes to rebuilding, just because the insurance wouldn't cover it because it was not in the policy. And I would say a big part of the population was in that position.
Meteorologist Greg Guss said some of the most affected tornado victims were children. He and his team spent time with psychologists to help answer questions and how to prepare them in the event of a next time.
In conjunction with all the recovery efforts and all that, we had one of our psychologists here in town working with the Northeast Human Services that actually set up a little program with Northwood that was specifically for kids, kid care program, and having to do with weather scaring type things. Tornado scare was the topic in there, and so a couple people on our staff and myself put together a little presentation and worked with kids a couple of times with this psychologist, just meeting with them, going over what their impressions of this were, talking to them about the episode and getting them to talk about it, kind of to unravel those background things that can hide in kids. You know, they're impacted by this, the sirens going on, the darkness, going outside and realizing that there's very little of your house still standing and looking around you and seeing that devastation. So it was also a chance for our office to engage with the community a little bit in the recovery effort.
Today, Northwood is still recovering. Empty lots in a few locations remind longtime residents of that stormy August night. But little by little, the town has grown slightly bigger in population than in 2007.
If we lost any population, it was pretty much temporary. I would say we're pushing back. We must be close to 1,000 or a little bit over now. Still some new homes going up. In fact, housing prices here are great. They're kind of unbelievable to some of us lifelong residents. But no, Northwood, for a small town, is doing really, really well, and we're growing.
Dave Korsmo said it was the close-knit community that helped put Northwood back together again.
Small towns kind of just pick up and do what they have to do, and that's what happened out here.
Do you have a tornado story you'd like to share with us? We all know someone who's experienced one of nature's most fascinating phenomenon. Drop us an email and we will have you on our show. The address is jenanddan@tornadotalk.com. That's Jen and Dan at tornadotalk.com. Next on Tornado Talk, twisters sweep through the Midwest on the evening of August 15th, 2016. A severe weather surprise in central Indiana on episode 19 of Tornado Talk.
This has been Tornado Talk. Take a moment to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Just search for Tornado Talk. Tornado Talk is free to you, but not free to produce. If you love what you hear, please support the show by becoming a member of Team Tornado Talk. It helps keep us going. Your monthly membership starting at $5 a month can earn you cool rewards like a Tornado Talk t-shirt, cap, koozies, and more. Plus, you'll always find free access to our past episodes. Just click the Patreon button online at tornadotalk.com.